Good afternoon. Hey friends, thank you for joining us for our first webinar of the 2024 year. I'm very excited about this one. I have a special guest who you will get a lot of fantastic information from, and I will introduce you in just a bit. We are on a new platform this year, so we hope that this platform is a good experience for you guys. I'll give you a couple of logistics. You will see a chat icon. Love for everyone to say hello. Tell us who you are and where you're from. Tell your fellow guests there who you are. So say hello. We're glad you're here. You will see a Q&A icon. Please feel free to put your questions in that box. We will be taking questions at the end. So we'll have about 45 minutes of content, and love to know what you guys are thinking. Tell us about your experiences. If those are different from what you hear from me and Phil, just interact with us. We love to hear from you. You'll also see a polls icon. We have 2 polls embedded. So you can tell us what you're experiencing, and everyone will be able to learn from you as much as me and Phil. So please join us in our polls this year. And then there's a survey icon. So we'd love to know about your experience on this webinar afterwards. We take that very seriously, and we try to gear our information and experience to things that are relevant and useful for you. We understand how important every hour of your life is, so we want to make this one as meaningful as possible. So I'm Kathy Ligon. Welcome again. We are happy to have you from the team at Hinge. I have a couple of things to let you guys know about that are coming up at Hinge. First of all, feel free to reach out to this team. This is the greatest group of people I've ever had the pleasure to work with, but their mission is to support you and things that are happening in your company to help you be as financially healthy as possible, help you grow, help you exit when the time is right. So certainly let us know when we can support you. We're super excited about our annual Shift conference this year. It will be our 7th year in our annual 3-day, 3.5-day business financial conference Shift. We're at the, as you can see, very beautiful Ritz-Carlton in Santa Barbara, California, the 1st of November, and our registration will open August 1st. So set that date. It both makes me joyful and a little sad that it sells out very quickly, and I want everyone to be able to be there. And so I hope that you guys will join us there, and we're putting together some amazing content for that. Also, registration will open February 1st for our annual day-and-a-half Thrive workshop. Thrive is a financial deep dive. We will work with each of our 100 guests individually to analyze your financial statements and do a one-on-one sit down with you the afternoon before to tell you where your best areas of opportunity are in this content. So we're at the beautiful Rittenhouse Hotel in downtown Philadelphia. That should be a lot of fun. It'll be a good group of people to get to know and learn from. So mark your calendar for February 1st. Plan to join us there. Let us know if you have questions. We have a QuickBooks training coming up. We have focused our QuickBooks content on a specific methodology for childcare for our early education clients. So it's QuickBooks training, but also is geared for our industry. So you can set your books up in a way that will allow you to benchmark with us and will allow you to look at your company in comparison with other companies of your size and in your area. So reach out to Hinge Advisors /financial coaching if you're interested there. Here's our amazing financial coaching team. They're fantastic to work with and lots of early education experience. Follow us on social media. That's how you find out about all of these opportunities. You can certainly scan right here to join us on Facebook and follow the things that are coming up. So let me introduce my good friend, Phil Vaccaro, who I met probably 7 or 8 years ago at a conference in New York, and immediately grabbed him to do the opening for our shift conference every year. Phil is with EY-Parthenon and is doing beautiful work in the industry. Phil and I collaborate a lot. He has research-based information to share with us. He works on behalf of the industry to help people make good decisions around their investments in the industry. And so what you'll hear from me is information that we gather as we survey clients and as we work with selling clients. You'll hear from Phil, and he'll tell us more about himself and the work that he does in just a little bit. But thank you for joining us, Phil.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, love having you here. So I'm going to kick us off with some general information about the state of the industry. And I'll tell you where my information comes from, a couple of sources here toward the end of the year. The first source is that our team of 25 people is on the phone all day long, speaking with business owners, investors, for both business and real estate assets to talk about what they're doing, what they're experiencing, what's going on, what shifts are you seeing. So that's the main source of our information. The second thing is I have the pleasure to gather the top 50 companies every year and write a state of the industry article for Child Care Information Exchange magazine. And that will be coming out this quarter. But I spend the end of the year in conversations with the top 50 community on what they're experiencing, what their plans are, where they're going in 2024. So some of that is fresh on my mind right now too. So you'll hear a little bit about that. So what we have planned for you guys are some industry trends that we see. I want to talk a little bit about the funding cliff that we just experienced. Phil will share his ECE market insight, and then we have some predictions maybe from Phil. He doesn't know about this yet, but for some predictions from Phil about where he sees opportunities in the space. And of course, we can collaborate on that. So where you see highlights here, I'll expand a bit more, but to tell you guys what we see in industry trends, we see continued growth across all segments of the industry. The industry did lose some programs during COVID. Unfortunately, there were some programs that didn't survive the difficulties of shutdowns and financial issues during COVID. So that did happen. However, we at the same time see tremendous growth, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. We see that the industry is largely has returned to pre-COVID levels of enrollment. So pre-COVID recovery could mean two things. It could be enrollment recovery, and we are certainly seeing that in a high demand market, and less hiring is an issue. However, it feels like most of the population has put in strong programs to mitigate some of the difficulties with hiring, and we'll talk more about that. Of course, the majority of the federal funding ended at the end of September, causing some financial issues with closures or sales of companies. We were particularly bullish in trying to help our clients navigate the rebalance of the financial picture, which I'll get into as well. And it feels like the majority of those clients did that well during COVID, and that they're prepared for the removal of those funds. There will be some companies who might have been more hesitant and could have more trouble. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're seeing extensive wait lists in infant and toddler groups. Larger than average tuition rate increases, although beginning in 2024, we did see most companies who were super aggressive during the last 4 years. I just had to realize in the last week when I'm speaking about the COVID period, it's been 4 years now. I kept saying 2 years, and then I realized I was way behind. We have seen, in addition to that, the removal of some discounts. I'll speak more about that. There's huge salary demand increases. This actually started before COVID, but it certainly did continue during COVID and has possibly leveled off at this point. Beginning in the fall of 2023, we heard a slight easing of hiring. Hiring and retention strategies have jumped to the top of everyone's priority list now, with a lot of historic marketing dollars now falling into staff recruitment, staff training, staff programs. And the last thing I'll mention is that in the last half of 2023, we have more and more clients with difficulties in either obtaining or retaining their insurance, and mainly facility liability insurance. Workers' comp seems to be stable. And we have a webinar coming up on that with some very specific strategies from the insurance community on what things you can be proactive about to prevent that from happening. So, but just hearing more and more about that. So in a little more detail, demand is high, like we said. I know that the hiring difficulty is very challenging for people, and it seems like we're at one place or the other. Either demand is high and it's difficult to get staff, or people aren't working and you have staff readily available. I would rather be in the market we're in today. As difficult as it is, in my opinion, I'd rather us have the business available, because there are things we can do to mitigate the staff challenges. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what to do about it when people aren't working. So this is an environment that, while challenging, we can put some strategies in place. So unemployment is low, parent confidence for childcare is high, and some slots in some schools, like we said, were eliminated from the market during COVID. Unfortunately for them, making the availability of slots a little tighter, meaning schools that are open today have even greater demand. So demand is high. We want to talk just a little bit about the funding cliff. We all heard about relief dollars expired with most of the states ending programs that they had in place. That one-time federal relief fund was critical in stabilizing the industry, and we are now seeing states make their own investments into childcare in varying ways. I'll just give you one of my favorites, and my favorite is that several states are now making an investment into the childcare of childcare teachers. And the beauty of this is so widely reaching. Not only does it help the teachers who would largely have half-price childcare to now have free childcare, what a great way for the business owner to now get full tuition for the staff of their teachers, and to market that to the potential hiring population, that this is a place where you can come and perform meaningful work and bring your children. There's a vehicle now for the childcare of your children. If you are not seeing this in your state and you have a strong childcare association or lobbying group in your state, be sure they know about this strategy, which is one of our favorite ones that we've heard in many, many years. So we really like that one. Because of some of the factors I've mentioned, we have seen our typical operating model slightly shifted. So as those of you who have been plugged in with us for quite a while are aware, we have a benchmarking tool You can find it at frameworkbyhinge.com. I'll get one of our wonderful webinar people here to put the link into our Q&A so you guys know where to go. You can input your school's license capacity and average tuition rate, and it will populate a benchmark for you. And what that says is, in your area, given your size and your tuition rate, here's what the average school would spend in each expense category. So when I'm talking about the model, and it's mainly what we have been working on, is the revenue to staff cost percentages. I've had a lot of people say to me, are you going to increase what you think we should be able to spend as a percent of revenue on staff? So the answer is no, because you have very slim margins already. Your costs have gone up for staffing. I don't think it's acceptable for you to say, oh, well, I'm going to make less money now because it's costing me more to do business. The answer is, I need to figure out what it's costing me to do business and charge my customers that amount. So we have worked really hard to help people understand that. In some places, people are reporting to us that staff costs have gone up 30%. As staff costs go up 30%, your tuition rates have to go up accordingly, because we need to keep the same ratio of staff costs to revenue. So in addition to pay rates, most everyone has seen additions in their cost load to things like training, recruitment, and career development, and also some increases in other operating costs. So to do very quick analysis of what it's costing you to do business and being sure you're charging customers has never been more important. It has changed really quickly in the last couple of years. As I said, our cost model is reinventing, I like to say. We have seen during COVID, record increases in tuition rates, where historically the industry would increase about 3 to 5% a year. For a couple of years, we saw more like 8 to 12% increases, and sometimes more than once a year. Again, we heard at the beginning of 2024 that the majority of people had gone back to a more stabilized tuition rate increase. Thank you, Sean, for saying that you experienced the same thing. You're up 35% in the past 3 years. So we're consistently hearing that. That's fantastic information for everyone. So if you're experiencing the same thing, you're probably on par with where everyone else is. I love the strategy to pair some possible eliminations of discounts with tuition rate increases if you can't as quickly as you need to get your tuition rates up. So I will say in general that the industry has moved away from the majority of discounts except staff discounts. So don't take anything away from staff right now. Very bad recipe in this environment. However, in every other category, all of the providers we're talking to are either have eliminated or are making moves to eliminate discounts. Also, think about tuition rates and discounts creatively, in that you can be choosy about specific age groups that you go up in. If you have a wait list in infants and toddlers, it's time to increase your tuition rate there. You could also grandfather current families and do a new policy for incoming families. It takes you much longer to get to the balance you need that way, but it's better than nothing. So what I would encourage you to do, because the industry historically has lived in the fear of what might happen. So two things. One thing is we've lived in the fear of what might happen if we increase where we need to be. And the second thing is we've used our competition as a gauge for where our tuition should be. But our competition is living in fear. So you might have to be the first one. that says, I have got to right this ship. I have to be the one who continues the balance between this excellence I want to provide and what I need to charge families. Something's going to get compromised. It'll either be the excellence or it will be you personally, and neither of those are sustainable. So without getting that right, it's just a recipe for decline in something that you've worked really hard to build. So this is our first poll. So if you guys will go over to the polls icon, here's our question. How impactful, I will say, how impactful was the loss of grant funding to your business? Because most people largely lost the bulk of the monies in September. There could be some state funding still to come. I'm just watching numbers. This is cool. So I hadn't seen the polling yet. That's really good. Thank you for the information. You guys weigh in on this because it's helpful information for us all. So are you fully prepared and will see no impact? And I would guess that the majority of those people have been pretty instrumental in getting their pricing right the last couple of years. Do you need to make changes quickly to adjust tuition rates? Do you expect that your profit margins will be significantly impacted? Or I hope no one chooses this, but if you do, then please immediately call us because I want to see how we can support you if you feel you're in danger of losing your business. So really good news. Good news. I guess you guys are the population that we preach to the most. So the majority of you guys are fully prepared with little or no impact. We do know a lot of people in that arena, they have cash reserves built up. They're fully prepared to go into the future without a huge impact. We do have behind that, but about at half of that, well, less than half, is that profit margins will be significantly impacted. Lastly, some people need to make changes quickly to pay or tuition rates. I would probably suggest that your changes need to be made to tuition rates. I don't think we're going backwards in where we are with pay. And I would say that changes in pay are going to be difficult and difficult to sustain. And then we do have some responses for people who feel they're in danger of losing their business. And again, please reach out because I respect that you guys know where you are. And I would certainly want, at the very least, my team to support you in any way we can. So thank you for that. Great poll. Lastly, for me is that in the top 50 survey that we did recently, 100% of the CEOs in the nation's top 50 groups said that they have aggressive growth plans for 2024. What does that mean for you? Maybe you are one of those, and that means your job's about to be really super busy because you're going to be building new schools, likely moving into new markets. You're going to look for acquisition schools. Our acquisition flow is tremendous. And prices still at the top of the game for both businesses. I will say real estate prices have softened slightly with the increase in interest rates. We expect that to go back to a normalization because we expect at least a couple of decreases in this year. But there are very aggressive growth plans. What that means for everyone is that new, bright, and shiny, if it's not there already, will be coming to your city. Be sure that your branding is solid. And when I say branding, I don't just mean your signage. I mean how you answer the phone, how you tour parents, how do you present your unique brilliance to parents, how do you perform the child and the parent experience. So work on that. If you need to make upgrades to your facility, now's a great time to do that. If you have some excess grant monies that are available for things like that, those are necessities in today's market. So just be sure that you're at the top of your game, that your tuition rate load reflects what you're doing, you're sustainable, and that you're prepared for potential new competition. So those are the things that we hear from our clients about their experience over the last couple of years and going into 2024. So I'm going to pitch it over to Phil now. And Phil, would you mind telling our guest a little bit about yourself and EY-Parthenon and what you guys do? And then I will just let you take it from there. I'll see you back at the end for some questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Kathy, and to your team for organizing this webinar today. We always appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you and know that you are a fantastic caretaker for the sector. My name is Phil Vaccaro. I am a partner at EY-Parthenon. EY-Parthenon is the strategy consulting group within the broader EY. Most know the accounting firm. It is the same organization. I have been involved in the education market now for over a decade. I started as a teacher in the New York City school system, worked for the school district, went to Parthenon, have done work from the early child care side through K-12 all the way through higher ed. But certainly in the last 5 or 6 years have spent more of my time working in early child care education, both from the standpoint of helping publics, states, and even some municipalities design early child care systems, as well as working with providers on issues of strategy, as well as working with investors as some of these providers transact. And we've worked with a number of the providers. We also work with the curriculum, the folks who provide curriculum to the space, who provide technology solutions to the space. So we really do have a comprehensive view on the market. And, we just presented at Shift in October, but we've been sort of continuing to serve the market over the last 3 or 4 months. And some of our views have shifted a little bit since the conference, and hopefully we'll bring some new insights into this conversation here today. So thanks again, Kathy. I think we're ready to jump in here. These insights that we'll talk about today are intended to be more of kind of a national view. While a lot of our work does bring us into the depths of certain markets, it is often the case that we are at least starting with a national view on the sector. So one of the things that we're continuing to monitor on a regular basis is just, what is driving, we know what the drivers are in the early childcare market, what's driving revenue in the space. And so how are those factors trending, both how they've trended historically and how are they trending going forward. So these are factors like female participation in the labor force, disposable income per household. There are some secular trends toward private ECE adoption, the size of the student population, 0 to 5 or 2 to 5, the relationship between the growth in price for ECE centers versus inflation and what the differential there is. And then, of course, tuition rates overall. So we track these indicators. We update our model regularly. As you have more female labor participation, more disposable income, as your population grows, as pricing sort of grows in line with inflation, those are all going to be positives for the market. we continue to see positive trends in some of these variables and some negative trends in others. So the story is a little bit mixed. The female labor force participation rate, our expectation is that there will continue to be further growth in that regard. Disposable income is actually down a little bit, and our economists predict a little bit of a softening of the economy this year. So disposable income, which I think we were a little bit more as a firm optimistic about a few months ago, I think with some of the labor dynamics and as well as some of the global conflict that we've been having have started to soften the view for the economy. So the views on disposable income are a little bit less favorable. The trend toward private EC adoption continues. We do have a significant supply-demand imbalance in the sector. There are a lot more kids who we'd love to have in various forms of organized care than actually are. And I'm always sort of struck when I see those charts that about 20% of the kids who are in the 0 to 5 age range are really in regular sort of organized care with more of an education focus. So we do have this significant supply demand imbalance. The size of the 2 to 5 population looking slightly negative right now. There was not the COVID baby boom. It actually went the other way, and these kids are sort of working their way through the system right now. Birth rates have picked up a little bit, but this is kind of an indicator that is flat to slightly negative right now. And then price growth relative to inflation also is a slight negative at this point. And then the overall tuition increases when you think about a price times volume component. Pricing is going up, and that is actually going to be the thing that is probably most responsible for growth in the short term based on our view. So if we flip to the next slide, we can see what this looks like in practice. And so what we have here is kind of a longitudinal view of market growth going all the way back to 2000. And you can see that from 2000 to 2000, or basically till COVID, 2019, we had a pretty sort of steady growth rate in the market. There was, it was positive in almost every year. 2011, I think, being sort of the one exception, which was a slight decline. But generally speaking, the market has grown pretty consistently historically. And then, of course, we hit COVID where we had the dip, and sort of through the recovery now. And, it's probably not a surprising outcome to see a projection going forward that looks a lot like where the long-term historical trends were. So we are forecasting about a 4% increase for the market on a nominal basis, which means including price, with probably 3 percentage points of that being price and about 1 percentage point of that being enrollment at this point. Again, these are forecasts based on sort of models that we have fit to these historical data trends. But this is in line with what we have had historically. So that is overall, I think, not the best outlook, but it is a favorable outlook certainly for the sector. And certainly certain markets within the country, may experience some of this a little bit differently. Some other trends that we're seeing, and Kathy touched on some of the potential impacts of the expiration of stimulus funding. But on the left-hand side here, what we're showing is that there has been consolidation in the market. So if you look at 2009, the larger chains and larger and regional chains made up about 5% of the overall market. We know that this has been a fragmented market historically. It is still very much a fragmented market, but 2023, we're looking at closer to 7 to 10% of all centers, sort of excluding sort of the long tail of family-based care. So the larger players, have almost doubled their share in the market, which is pretty significant. And we do anticipate that will continue. If you look at the right-hand side, we've sort of taken some of the numbers off the chart just because, oh, sorry. Yeah, we're still on slide 4, but just the right-hand side. What's happening is, and we talked about the the Century Foundation had its study that was trying to project what's the impact of, keep going to 4.
All right.
Yep. So what the Century Foundation certainly out there with $3.2 million seats at risk, 70,000+ centers. We do anticipate that there will be a reduction in the number of single site centers from 23 to 24. That some centers will find themselves in a situation where, with the stimulus expiry, that it really is going to be hard for them to continue on in the sector. Some of those organizations, to the extent that they sort of see this coming and maybe are trying to get out ahead of time and make themselves available for acquisition, maybe some of that. But as Kathy has taught me, once things start to go south with some of these businesses, once they sort of reach that point of economic distress, things happen pretty quickly. So we do expect there to be a little bit of a contraction. The light blue here is the single sites, and then the darker blue is the multi-site organizations. We do expect them to continue to grow at about a 4% clip over the next few years. So we do see more growth happening among the scaled players. For the single sites, probably a little bit of a dip this year. Probably not on the order of magnitude as what some of the market studies have suggested, but we also think that it will rebound once we sort of get through 2024 and the organizations who continue on have reached a little bit of a rebalancing, have achieved a little bit of a rebalancing in their business economics. But this trend toward consolidation, we do think will continue. If we go to the next slide, one of the other things that we have been looking at in the context of the expiration of the stimulus dollars at the federal level is what's happening at the state level. And a number of states had really already started to increase funding for early child care. So we broke this up into blue-leaning states and red-leaning states, but the trend really exists on both sides, maybe to a slightly different order of magnitude. But we have seen an infusion of funding to support expansion of early child care programming, as well as just more funding going to the sector. It is interesting to see the difference between the blue states and the red states in terms of the overall dollars per child that is allocated from the states. It tends to be more on the among Democratic states than Republican states, which is actually consistent with funding levels from a K-12 perspective as well. But I think the point here is that as we lose federal dollars, states are stepping up to try to make up some of the difference in the loss of federal funding, and that is certainly good to see, and will hopefully create a little bit of a softer landing for the sector as it navigates through this period of adjustment. I know we talk a lot about labor, and that is where we go on the next slide. We had a version of this slide in our presentation in October. We've updated it since. You can see that on the left-hand side, in terms of total U.S. child care services jobs, we were at 1 million plus before COVID, and it's been a long road back, but we're about 2% short of where we were in 2020 at this point. And that's encouraging that we're continuing to push in that direction. It's been a constraint for growth for some centers, and to the extent that we continue to make progress in this regard, certainly bodes well for the industry. But we know a lot of this has to do with wages, and childcare workers are effectively a second percentile wage earning group, and that is tough. So there's a lot of competition for folks at that level of compensation. Retail, fast food, office support, and then clearly, if you're working for a school district, you're being you're a kindergarten teacher, then you're effectively looking at salary levels that could be double what you're getting at the private providers, and frankly, there's a lot of upward wage pressure in school districts for teachers right now, which is only sort of further complicating this story. So while I think the labor issues are probably less severe today than they were 6 to 12 months ago, still the folks that we talk to are trying to be incredibly creative about the way that they approach their talent management from a recruiting standpoint and a development standpoint. We know from some other research that the quote unquote quality of the candidates that folks are attracting are not quite as high as they've been in the past. And so maybe that suggests that there's a greater need to develop folks internally. And so, there's a lot of work that's involved with that, but the labor issues continue to be certainly present. We also spend a lot of time looking at state-funded pre-K policies, universal pre-K, and here's a map of the U.S. with the states colored based on the extent of their universal pre-K policies. There are 6 states that do not have a public pre-K offering, but the majority do have various forms of state funding programs, so state-funded programs. So public pre-K non-universal, which just basically means that not all students in a particular state are eligible. That there's 29 states that offer some form of state subsidized pre-K, public pre-K. You have another 14 states that have full universal pre-K with mixed delivery, and what mixed delivery means is that both private providers and public providers can participate in the program. And then you have 2 states with full universal pre-K with just public delivery, with the California TK program being one of them, and some of what Oklahoma is doing. But the majority of these states do allow for the private providers to participate. And we think, just from a capacity standpoint, it makes the most sense if to create these mixed delivery systems and to allow for private providers who are probably more nimble and flexible to be able to provide services for kids who historically have not had access to early child care programming. So if we look at some of the specifics, on the next page we've got, I know it's small font, but we've got Georgia versus Florida. Here, it's actually less important that what the details of these of the programs in these markets are for purposes of this conversation. The headline is really to say, states are making different design decisions as it relates to the construction of their pre-K programs. There's differences in the amount of time that is covered, the number of days that are covered, which students are eligible either by age or by income levels, how private providers can participate in the system, what some of the rules, regulations may be as it relates to staffing ratios, how the reimbursement flows into the system. So whether the dollars are directed to the centers directly or whether they are funneled through families. And so, the UPK, universal pre-K in Georgia has largely been, funds have largely been directed through providers, for example. The VPK, voluntary pre-K system in Florida, sorry, I want to make sure I said this correctly. In Georgia, it's funneled through the providers. In Florida, it's funneled through the parents. So, and these are just 2 of the 50 states, or 50 plus DC. And they're all, as we would expect, making different design choices here as it relates to these programs. So if you're operating a site within a state, it's important to understand the dynamics within that state. If you're across states, then it's important to understand the dynamics across each of the states in which you're operating. I also really like this slide because I know there's a lot of conversation around what is state-funded pre-K doing to private enrollments. And let me just take a few minutes here to walk through what this slide says, because it just may be a little tricky. So first on the x-axis, you have the percentage of 4-year-olds who are enrolled in state-funded pre-K. This was in 2022. So the further you are to the right, the greater the participation of students in state-funded pre-K programs. So DC being the one most of the way to the right, Florida also in that category, high adoption of state-funded pre-K. But this is, I think, the largest 25 states, and they're kind of they go all the way from Indiana with less than 10% to DC north of 80% participation in these state-funded programs. On the y-axis, you have a measure of private provider capacity. So, if you are higher on this chart, that basically means that you have a higher percentage of seats relative to the number of 4-year-olds in your state. So you would say, it's a robust footprint of private providers. The higher you are up. If we thought that, or if public pre-K were taking students from private providers, and I'm not suggesting that it's not happening in certain places and more to a greater or lesser extent, but taking a look at all the data across states, if public programs were taking share from private providers, you would expect to see a downward trend where you have more adoption of state-funded pre-K, you would see less private capacity. But here you can see that there's, we didn't put the trend line in, but there is certainly, this is more of a scatter shot of points. So if you did draw the trend line, it would go straight across. And so we don't necessarily see empirically from the data that public pre-K is having this cannibalization effect. Again, there are probably some sort of markets where people are experiencing some of that, but nationally, that has not sort of played out in the data yet. So that leads us to our polling question, which, just to underscore this point, based on empirical state level ECE data, as state-funded pre-K enrollment increases, what is the impact on private ECE capacity? As you think about your response to this question, I almost wish I framed it another way, because I know what this data says. What I don't know is what you all would say in your experience if you agree with that conclusion, and what has been your own sort of personal experience with the impact of universal pre-K. So that's sort of I guess a corollary to what we're posing here. That if you want, you can put in the chat, because I do think that that's an important question as well.
So this is going to be more of a mixed opinion.
Right.
Maybe
yeah,
not.
maybe we're kind of getting that the opinion through this question anyway. Because I mean, realistically, I do think that there are a couple ways to view this, and it probably does differ by market. But you could say the added funding for pre-K is additive in the sense that it is getting more folks involved in more families involved in early childcare education, and it's expanding the pie overall. And this is a net benefit for both private providers and public providers. You can also imagine that in some cases that some of these public programs, I would imagine in California that the TK program is probably pulling some 4-year-olds into the public system, and so that may be a specific place where a little bit harder to compete there. And then Yeah, so I could see it going both ways. Clearly from the responses here, we do have a mix. I mean, technically the answer to the question is C. However, if these answers reflect your own kinds of experience with universal pre-K, we are seeing slight weighting toward decrease in private ECE capacity, or maybe say a little bit of cannibalization as it relates to private provider enrollment relative to an increase in enrollment, but it's not overwhelming in that way.
Great. So before I ask you to tell us your prediction for the future, we have a couple of really great questions that I'd like to talk about, and encourage everyone else. There's some great comments as well. So I'd like to encourage everyone to put any questions you have in the, looks like we're going with the chat. You can also put them in Q of E if you like. Either one, we'll pick them up. We've got about 10 minutes here. So Phil, in some of your information, you talked about the nation's largest groups and the growth that they're experiencing. Do you have a feel for whether that growth comes mainly from opening newly constructed schools, or is that mainly from the acquisition of smaller companies?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I do think the scale players would give you a slightly different answer that's specific to their organization. But the answer is both, for sure. We know a number of folks who continue to be very acquisitive, who have their long list of potential targets that they are tracking, that they are bidding on. I'm sure this work is keeping you busy, Kathy, and those acquisitions continue to happen. At the same time, the ECE industry is interesting in the sense that it really has to continue to track demographic trends, and the demographic landscape across our country has certainly changed. And so, there are states that have fewer kids, there are states that have more kids. And so we are seeing a number of these scale players do very careful analysis to track these demographic trends and also pursue greenfield opportunities. So it is, I don't know if I can say, what percentage is this and what percentage is that. You may have a good feel of that yourself, Kathy, but certainly both strategies are in play here. Yeah,
I would agree with that. I think what we hear is that going into 2024, we might see more of a shift to new construction than some of the historic acquisition, but that definitely has not slowed down either. Another question, as we talked about the level of state money that was being applied in different states, did that include funding for universal pre-K, or what was that?
All state funding, yeah.
All state funding, okay. A couple of comments about the mixed delivery system. It has shown a great increase of private capacity in rural Virginia. This has allowed more programs to open. So that's quite interesting that it has allowed the expansion of programs there. And I think the key there may be rural, because I think we're going to see some areas where the ability for private companies to serve communities that maybe don't have another opportunity in their area. That'll be interesting to watch. Any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that's right. I think these comments reflect that, the sort of the positives and the challenges associated with universal pre-K and how it is very much sort of location dependent.
Right. There's also a comment, and we hear this quite frequently, that it's, 3 and 4-year-olds will register for a private program and then they don't know until the very last minute that they have a slot
Sure.
in a public school or a public situation. So where that school made plans and hired and geared up for that, at the last minute, they can lose a good bit of their population. And that's certainly difficult.
It's frustrating. And you know, a lot of these programs are defined based on amount of time too. And you know, they don't necessarily offer the full day. They don't maybe not offer, maybe it's more subsidized for it covers a certain amount of time, maybe, you know, 3 days a week, but not 5 days a week, a certain number of hours a week. So, you know, what do parents do in those cases, right? Are they using a combination approach to care for their kids? Are they having to sort of, you know, supplement the public participation with various after school and before school programming? So I do think that in many ways, these universal or state funded programs are creating a level of complexity in the market that is often difficult, not only for private centers to navigate, but also for families to navigate.
Right. Okay. I hate to leave questions, but I have one actually that I would love your opinion of, because we, as part of our webinar series this year, we want to ask some opinions of certain questions, and then we would love to compile these at the end of the year and share them with our guests. But moving into 2024, and we might have answered this question, but where do you see the industry's greatest risk?
Yeah, where there are many risks, you know, picking the greatest risk. I do think it is in the near term, the potential contraction in supply among some of the single site operators, and what that can do to some local communities, and you know, the ability for those communities to, you know, balance their employment and financial needs with their ability to get, you know, high quality care, or any care really for that matter. And so I do think that this is the greatest risk for this upcoming year.
Yeah. Flip side of that, if you're a business owner in this industry, where do you see the greatest opportunity?
Yeah, I think that certainly from a center management perspective, there's just has to be a level of creativity in dealing with some of these big challenges, and whether that is in getting a more sophisticated sort of talent development function, or potentially pursuing partnerships with employers to maybe provide a little bit of stability through your customer base. But I think that the greatest opportunity here is really to show what centers can do to help really the COVID generation as they sort of go through. I mean, you know, the kids who are 2, 3, 4 now were born, you know, in the heart of COVID or during COVID, and these kids, we know from some of the research, they're coming in with less socialization, you know, more behavioral challenges. Maybe a little bit less sort of preparedness for some of those basic, introductory literacy and math skills, numeracy skills. So, you know, this is critical for not only the kids and the families, but, you know, if the providers can really, you know, figure this out, not only is it going to help these kids tremendously, but it also, you know, continues to make the case for how important the sector is writ large to the economy and, you know, long-term well-being of our citizens. So I think that is the biggest opportunity, and it's hard, but I think it's a tremendous opportunity.
Very well said. I love that. We are at time, and I would like to point out our next webinar on tax strategies, a little bit different from how we have focused today, but we hope you guys will join us on February 14th with Laura Johns, who has spoken for us at Shift as well, and gave some great information to our guests there. So thank you so much, Phil. I always really enjoy your perspective also appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of the industry. It's so meaningful to, of course, people like me, but also business owners who are trying to make fact-based decisions about their business. And we really appreciate you and your team and the work you do in this space.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate the ongoing partnership.
Great to see you. Take care and be well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.